Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bitesize. I hope you're all well. Hope you all had a great half term and you're ready to go again. We've got a really great session for you today, a really engaging, fun, simple activity. It's going to be demonstrated to you by Errol Seaman. I hope you enjoy it. Please put any comments or questions in the Q&A. We'll pick them up at the end of the session. Errol, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, all. Hope you're still feeling energized from the reverberations of half term, as Mark said. Very simple activity this morning based upon the game of Noughts Crosses. So I've called it Noughts Crosses, a strategy for learner-centered formative assessment. Yeah, so the aims of the session today: share a simple Noughts Crosses themed resource strategy, which can serve as an interactive learner-centered assessment tool. And obviously, as we always do, is linked to the TLA framework. Our pledge to you, as always, is to be timely. Obviously provide something of substance, something of merit that you can utilize within your practice straight away. A little bit different today. It's not necessarily a resource that you're going to be taking away, more of a concept that's easy to put together, that's quite specific for your particular subject area, very adaptable type resource. Yeah, it's kind of linked to the TLA framework via learning activities. Obviously it can be used in conjunction with a lot of other activities to push you up to enhance, and also as an assessment tool, very useful in establishing an appropriate assessment method for self-assessment with the students, but also for the teacher to assess as a whole group as well. Yeah, I just wanted to share a quote with you just to begin from a brilliant book called Inside the Black Box. And Black and William, in this particular book, they looked at formative assessment within education. And just two quotes I want to share: self-evident proposition that teaching and learning have to be interactive. This is one of the things that they found from their study. The power of assessment being interactive. And they followed up with this quote: all those activities undertaken by teachers and by their students in assessing themselves, which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. Thus, assessment becomes formative assessment when the evidence is actually used to adapt the teaching work to meet the needs, i.e. we're taking feedback, from what we've delivered, allowing the students to self-assess, for us to assess the students and make a judgment to say, all right, these guys are really good at this, they're not so good at this, and we're gonna, cycle back and look at the things that they're not good at in order to improve their understanding. Yeah, so I just want to set the stage for this particular activity with that. Yeah, so as I said, based upon Noughts Crosses, or if you're American theme, tic-tac-toe, obviously we should all be familiar with the game of Noughts Crosses, unless you've grown up on the planet Zark somewhere in the solar system. Three simple lines of crosses or noughts that you're attempting to get 3 in a row. And the assessment tool is based upon that. And what we're doing is replacing the crosses and the noughts with themes, things from your particular subject area that you're assessing. So for example, yeah, so as I said, I haven't got necessarily a resource to give, but you just obviously would have just a simple grid such as this. I just got this from the internet. And let's just say, for example, for this example, we're looking at something that's themed with motor vehicles. We're looking at an engine, and more specifically, parts of an engine. So for example, the students will get to know parts of an engine, and we could use this activity to populate our Noughts Crosses grid with key aspects of, or key parts of, the engine. And in this particular example, we're looking at the students to provide a description or an explanation of the different parts as a formative assessment. Yeah, they're looking at, or maybe you could do it in terms of the function. You could look at function or meaning of a particular theme. And how this activity would work, there's different ways which I'll go into later on, but we could, you could do it as a pair, you could do it as a 3, where the third person is serving as the person who's got the answers, just as the independent adjudicator, so to speak. And so a person would choose to say, all right, I'm going to go for cylinders, and they would have to provide a description or an explanation of what cylinders are. And if they get it correct, then they get that particular mark. Then the other person would have their go, and the person would say, all right, I'm going to go for what did I put there? Pistons. And they would have to provide a description of pistons. If they get it wrong, then then they can't obviously get their cross on that particular mark, then the next person would be able to go again and be able to get their circle in the area. So as they're going back and forth, yeah, spark plugs, provide a description, what's the function of spark plugs, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, they're actively, the students would be actively self-assessing. They'd have a potential answer sheet in some particular format, which I'll talk about in a moment, or obviously they could go back and forth and have a discussion whether or not the actual answer is correct or not. But as it plays out, they're attempting to get 3 in a row, and once they do, whoever gets there first, obviously they would be the winner in this particular case. So you can see it can be used in a very effective but fun but very simple way. I'll give you another example. Let's say we're labeling in this particular case. So I'll use the example of the skeletal system. And in this particular case now, you've got the different parts of the skeleton, and instead of necessarily explaining a function, which you could still talk about the function in this sort of thing, but in this example, now the students will be pointing to the correct parts of the bone. So they choose the humerus. They would have to identify the humerus on their own body or on an accompanying diagram. If they get it correct, same thing, they get their noughts or their cross, and it would work in that same way. So again, in this example, they'd get one opportunity to point to the correct bone, and if they get it incorrect, then that person misses their goal, and the person would then obviously have an extra advantage because they wouldn't have a cross in front of them. Yeah, so the same sort of thing. Another example. So this one was inspired from a session I saw with Fatima from the SEN department, and she was doing an activity based upon her students identifying images which are clean or dirty. So this is an example where now you can differentiate this activity to provide images. So in this example here, the students will be identifying whether or not the image shows something which is clean or which is something which is dirty. So they could pick something that they know, for example, the dinner plate right here, and they can say, this dinner plate, it is dirty in this particular case, and they will get their cross. And I think, all right, what's this my go now? And I'll say the shoes are clean or dirty. Seems very simple from my point of view, but obviously, in terms of levels of ability levels, people got some learning needs, and this is a very apt type of activity that you could use to get creative with the way we're assessing our students, or allowing the students to assess the mop's clean or whatever it might be. Yeah, so the images can be displayed in order to function. Thought of this idea just walking down Chef Michael's around the kitchen area, and he's got some images on the wall of different types of alkaline vegetables and things of that nature. So this could be a simple example where the students have to identify something related to your subject area. So in this particular case, you've got different herbs and different vegetables. The students have to identify the correct one, whatever they might be, or that one, or let me go back. So for example, top left-hand corner, this is mint, for example. They have to identify it's mint. They get their noughts, they get their cross, whatever it might be, the same sort of concept. So you begin to see how it can be quite versatile in allowing you to prep different things in order to provide your students with a solid assessment base, formative assessment base, just to review some simple activities. Can be used as a starter, can be used as an activity at the end of the lesson to consolidate learning. Even within the middle of the lesson, if you cover a certain topic, you could use it to consolidate learning. Even from the point if you're doing demonstrations, for example, yeah. So it could be, for example, that let's say you're doing performing arts, or you're doing fitness, or whatever it might be. Maybe it's a stretch, maybe it's a dance move, maybe it's a demonstration or something where in this particular case with the stretches, they have to identify a particular stretch, for example. In this case, a calf stretch, then they would have to demonstrate so they can get out of their seats. It becomes a bit more dynamic. They have to demonstrate a particular stretch for the calf, or a particular stretch for the quadriceps stretch, or maybe it's quite specific and you have to show what the cobra stretch is and demonstrate it in that way. So this becomes a much more dynamic assessment here. And last one, so it could be something where I got this idea from Mark Hyde. He asked me to print some information for him one day. I thought, oh, this is a really good idea, where you've got different words that are associated, in this particular case, English descriptors, aids, and students would have to identify the description of or an explanation of what a verb is, what a rhetorical question is. But in this particular case, what you're doing, you're providing them a descriptor. So now you've got the descriptors that are there because maybe it's a bit more complex. And now, as they identify, they can look at all the different descriptions, think, verbs. And now they can look and they can make a choice. And remember, in this situation, you've just got one chance. You get it right, cool. And now you can tick it off, and now they can see the options reducing because they will tick off the ones that have been added onto the noughts and crosses grid as they go through it. And then you can tick it as I'm showing you right here. Yeah. So if you look at this here, so just to end, you could consolidate a lot of learning that you've done, for example, within a half term. So it's not too clear with the resolution, I apologize. But if you look at the middle, it's got different themes that they've covered. Bones and muscles, for example. I think that says assessment types of joints, goal setting. And each of these within the middle grid, you can see it's color coded where they've got mini noughts and crosses grids for each of the particular areas that they've covered throughout this particular term or half term. So now this can be, see how it can be a more expansive, cohesive type of assessment where you can have different themes and the students can work through it, where it can become a more elongated, longer length type of assessment review. So just to consolidate what I said, so different ways to facilitate. You could easily have it as a two-person assessment where students are going back and forth testing each other's knowledge. You could have a third person where they act as an independent adjudicator. So in this particular case, you might have three different noughts and crosses grids where each of them get the opportunity to be, the judge in this particular case and say whether the answer is correct or not. And they can switch around roles. And as I said, you could have descriptors in order to provide students with like a crib sheet that they can look at and make a decision on what is what. Obviously, in this particular case, you've got the question sheet here, you wouldn't have the answers. And as I showed you, it can be visual or it can be demonstrations that you could utilize also. Benefits for this sort of activity, really excellent for self-directed learning and assessment, brings in that competitive element of engagement, makes, doing a little formative assessment a little bit fun with the challenge. Very easy to prepare, you could knock a few of these out, within a half an hour period and just have a really good collection of different resources that you could use for upcoming classes. Be specific and relevant feedback that you can cycle back, as I said earlier, within the William and Black quote from the book. And it's very good for differentiation of ability levels because you can have different types of grids that could, even on the same subject area, for example, with the bones, you could have different bones that are more familiar, for example, and then another grid which are for ones that are a little bit harder. And as I said, you can attach it to previous lessons, upcoming assignments that are, just to prep them, just to plant seeds within their mind. So just to finish on a quote for today, for the day, I love this quote. It says, if summative assessment can be described as a digital snapshot, formative assessment is like a streaming video. One is a picture of what a student knows that is captured in a single moment of time. The other is a moving picture that demonstrates active student thinking and reasoning. Yeah, and this is a really good assessment tool, noughts and crosses, to capture that dynamic assessment as students, demonstrate what they know, and you can have that conversation and as I said, refine what you're delivering in order to plug those gaps in student knowledge. So that's enough from me, Mark. I'll let you conclude the session.
Thank you so much, Errol, and thank you for sharing such a brilliant activity, beautifully presented, clear as anything. I mean, what I love about this activity personally, Errol, is how versatile it is. As you've demonstrated, it could be done in a digital format like you've done today. I'm thinking a teacher could just draw a grid on the board and just put some things up there and prepare this in class in 30 seconds. Really great way of formative assessment. And by the way, I love that quote. I've never heard that quote before, but that really captures the difference between summative and formative assessment. Quick, before we go, nearly at time, but quick thank you to Sarah Pagram for the comment in the chat. Sarah said this is a great starter activity that can be used to recap previous learning. It can be used for any subject so simply. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for the comment, Sarah. And Errol, thanks again. Brilliant session. Appreciate it, and have a
You're
great
most
day, everyone.
welcome. All right. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.